Hello and welcome to Journey Undiscovered Mental Health Roundtable event. It's a pleasure to have people coming in. So welcome. We can see many participants coming in. So we'll just take a few moments to allow people to come in and get themselves sorted. But it's a wonderful opportunity for us to open up a dialogue today to address the many aspects of mental health and well-being in many of the sectors in the events industry. And we're really looking forward to covering some of the issues that we all see from a holistic perspective. For those who just arrived, the event will be recorded live. And we'll also be sending you a copy of the recording in an email this week. Also, the Journey Undiscovered podcast will also be turning this video recording into an audio file so that you can listen to it as well. So just seeing the participants come in. For those who have just joined us, we'll just do a bit of housekeeping to ensure that you understand how this webinar works. For those who have just joined, please open your chat function and toggle it to all panelists and attendees. And if you wish, please add your name and where you're joining us from today in the chat box. Otherwise, if you want to remain anonymous, you have the option to tick for that as well. So let's see who's in. Hey, Michelle from Melbourne, how you going? Good to have you here. Katrina. Hey, Em, welcome from Geelong. Got lots of people from Melbourne, which is fantastic. Hey, good morning, Naomi from Brisbane. It's good to see a Queenslander here. I hope you're enjoying the heat and the sunshine. Lots of people from Melbourne. Susie from Adelaide, welcome. So we'll keep going. Again, we'd like to open up and say thank you to those who submitted a question or concern via the registration page for our guests to address today. And for those who registered via the Facebook event page, you may not have had the chance to submit a question or concern. So during the discussion, before we get to the Q&A at the end, it would be great if you could please, in the Q&A chat box below, that's the Q&A chat box function, if you could pop in any question or concern that you had on your mind, or if one of our guests address something that you're really keen for them to answer, please put that into the Q&A chat function. If we're unable to get to the end of the Q&A and those questions, we will be looking at doing a separate podcast where a couple of the guests will be coming on and answering all of the questions that we can't get to today. So feel free to put it in there and don't be afraid to put it up there, because we wish to ensure that your question is answered. Also, there is an upvote function here as well, which is a thumbs up. So if there's a question that someone's asked in the Q&A chat box, please put a thumbs up, and what that does, your upvote will then put the question up towards the top of the chat function, the Q&A function, I should say. So firstly, I'd like to pay our respects to the traditional owners of the land on where we meet, and to the elders past, present and emerging. For those who don't know me, my name is Byron. I am a freelance event manager in the business and conference sector. I'm also a host of the Journey Undiscovered podcast, and I'm also a mental health advocate. So I'll be your host for what is going to be the inaugural event for Journey Undiscovered. So again, thank you so much for taking the time out today to come on here live. We are joined by a wonderful lineup of speakers today. We do have with us Kirsty Ritchie. She's the Associate Director of the Arts Wellness Collective. We have Eugene Wong, who's the Chief Story Shaper and Life Coach from A Stronger Narrative. He's coming live from London with that backdrop. Just kidding. Margot Collins, mental health practitioner from Event Mental Health. And we have lastly Anne Jacobs, who's Deputy National Welfare Coordinator from Support Act. So welcome, guys. Thank you so much for taking the time out today to come on here. So today we're going to be focusing on three main questions, and they are, the first one is, what are people experiencing with their mental health and well-being in each of the sectors? Second one would be, what immediate crisis support is available and what are the steps to receiving them? And then lastly, which I think will be really valuable for you, is the fact that we're going to be providing some top tips to those in the industry right now. And what can we do and what can you do to support each other in each of the sectors of the industry? So I'd like to get cracking. Question one is about what's really happening. So what sorts of mental health and wellbeing concerns are people experiencing in your sector? So I think we'd like to throw that to Anne from Support Act to answer first.
Thanks, Byron. So for those of you who don't know, Support Act is the nationwide charity that works with people in the music industry. So that's musicians, crew, or other music industry workers. And we have a few different services, but the one I work for is the crisis relief social work programs. So that means that I'm assessing the applications for financial grants that we have available. At the moment, what I'm doing is speaking pretty much every day to people who have lost work through the shutdown of the music industry. Obviously, we know that events and arts and music were sort of the first industry to be affected by this pandemic and possibly going to be the last to recover. So what I've been talking to people a lot recently is about uncertainty. So I think, you know, people who work in events and arts and music are sort of used to uncertainty, you know, sort of used to not having things lined up, or used to things, you know, possibly starting something and not really sure if it's going to be a success or not. But I think this is quite different because it's a, you know, previously there was the potential of things happening. You know, you might have had a gig planned, you know, you weren't really sure if it was going to be successful or not, but at least the potential of planning a gig was there. So I think that's really challenging for people at the moment, that uncertainty about when things are going to get back up and running again. Also, I think people in these industries are really identified with their job. So musicians really identify with that part of themselves. That's, you know, being a musician is really part of their identity, and I think lots of identity conversations. Also, people not sure whether they should continue in the industry or whether they should retrain and look for other work, look for something else. And, you know, and that relates also to the financial concerns that I'm talking to people about all day, you know, reduction of income and these upcoming changes to JobKeeper and JobSeeker that are really, you know, we're about to hit that cliff. So that's a real concern for people, you know. So those are the main things I'm sort of coming across every day.
Yeah, you're right about the financial concerns for those who are on JobSeeker and JobKeeper. I know that it's not going to be as long lasting as we were hoping for, but we do know that Beyond Blue has teamed up with Financial Counsellors Australia. So if anyone has any financial concerns, then that is also another avenue for you to talk to someone about your financial concerns, and maybe might be able to help you strategically about what you can do in this time. I'd like to throw it over to Eugene. What's really happening in your world as a life coach?
Yeah, so I deal with a lot of coaching regarding, well, life direction and also career, and I also consult for quite a few organisations in the arts and events sphere. So I get to see a little bit of both the personal side and the organisational side. Money concerns have come up a fair bit. And as Anne was saying, this uncertainty has really played into that, especially after the second lockdown started. I noticed that there was a deeper grief or a deeper sort of depression, and lots of people started to lose hope because what they thought they could power through with, they said, well, now it's looking less likely. And after the announcements on Sunday, I feel like there's even less hope for a lot of people. So I noticed quite a few people, excuse me, quite a few people commenting on how after Sunday's announcement, they've decided they're just going for a career change. They're not going to try to pivot anymore. It's just too hard. I think also at the same time, people have been dealing with creative blocks and saying, I've got all this time at home, but I can't make anything. My brain is too full, or my brain is way too empty for things. Usually it's too full. Plus a bit of an existential crisis about saying, well, I'm not qualified for anything else. I was at the top of my game, and now I'm forced to apply for a job stacking shelves at Coles, and I didn't even get that. And so that's really difficult for someone who has spent the last 10 or 15 years working in the industry, very well respected, very comfortable with their position, to face that and saying, I have such a specific set of skills that how do I apply that? And a lot of people are very confused about how they can use those skills elsewhere. I think it's fair to say that not everybody is in crisis though. And you know, it's really easy to say, oh, everybody's out of their minds. No, that's not necessarily the case. Some are treading water quite well, or just keeping their heads above water. Some have gone underground and have been hiding in caves. They're probably the ones that I tend to be most concerned about, actually. And then there are some who have been very busy because they've found that their industry really needs them. And so they're working around the clock trying to save their industry or save different organizations. A lot of people have been questioning why they're doing what they're doing, and looking at where they get their purpose from, where they get their value or their life direction from. What's the meaning of life in all of this? I've noticed quite a few people aren't handling the isolation well. A lot of the people who have touch as their key love language or quality time, you know, the massive extroverts are just dying at the moment. You know, for those of you who've been following commentary about suicide, the projections were that best case scenario, the suicide rate would increase by 25% over the next year. The worst case scenario would be that it would increase by 50%, which is an extra 1,500 deaths due to effectively mental health issues. The most recent figures that have come through have actually said that we've bucked the trends and the suicide rate's actually gone down slightly. It's kind of stayed steady and gone down slightly. And I think that's due to a range of factors that I won't go into today. But so we're doing pretty well at the moment, but I'm anticipating that there will be a delayed spike in suicides that will come over the next 6 months or so, and in particular after lockdown ends. So that's something to just be mindful of.
Yeah, good points, Eugene. I must say that looking for work, even though there's only a small amount of work sort of coming out the other end, the other concern would be that we're all applying for the same job, and there's hundreds, if not over 1,000 applicants for one job, which can be a little bit disheartening. Let's move on to Margot. What's happening in your world, because you look across quite a few sectors?
Yes, event mental health, we help events prepare or review their event mental health plans, and we also provide on the ground professional mental health support at events, and that's for attendees as well as workers and volunteers if they are part of the event. So yeah, we're involved in a lot of different events, and I've actually just written a list, and a lot of it's been covered already, and that really says to me that a lot of people are going through very similar things. So my list: anxiety, grief and loss, coping with uncertainty, loneliness, loss of social connection. I've heard people talk about my touring family, my festival family. Those connections are gone now, or at least for the time being. So loss of social connection, loss of meaning and purpose. A lot of people find their sense of purpose in life through their work, through contributing, making a difference. And that's just gone for a lot of people too at the moment. Catastrophizing about the future, different personality traits for different people, but I've noticed a lot of people thinking the future's going to be terrible, and we don't know that yet. And that can be really damaging for people speculating about what the future will be like before we even get there, rather than just dealing with what's happening here and now. Anger that this isn't fair, and it isn't, that the whole sector is potentially wiped out. Frustration that organisations don't seem to understand how tough it is for people in the events sector. I've heard people talking about powerlessness, loss of choice. I was speaking to someone who said, but I always thought I could just leave my job in events and I'll just get another job in events. Or if I lost my job, I'll just go and get another one. Well, there are no other ones. And that was just something, of course, no one ever predicted would be the case. So no choice, no power. Loss of expression and creativity. Events people tend to be creative. That outlet's not available for people at the moment. And of course, as people have already spoken about, financial strain and pressures. And coupled with that, I've noticed guilt. The people who have been offered work or have work feel bad that they don't have those financial pressures that a lot of their peers and colleagues do have. And I just want to quickly talk about, Eugene, you spoke about grief, but I also want to speak about the stages of change, which is very similar to the stages of grief. So I just want to quickly go through them. There's only 4. It's shock and disbelief, anger and other emotions, coming to terms with the new normal, and then acceptance and moving forward. And the reason I really wanted to speak about them very briefly is that it can be a roller coaster. You can go through all those feelings, but the main point I'd like to make is that it's not linear necessarily, just like the stages of grief. You can be in acceptance and then you're right back at anger, or you can be in anger, then go into disbelief again. So I'm hoping people can keep that in mind when it can feel pretty overwhelming and very emotional and you don't know what's going on and I should be feeling better now or I should be feeling worse or whatever people think. It doesn't work that way. It's a roller coaster, and that's okay, and that's normal and hard. And if I've got time, I just really want to quickly talk about an example of someone I was talking with the other day. It's a guy who works in events production, live gigs. The whole production had to relocate interstate because he was in Melbourne. Melbourne's in lockdown. So the whole kit and caboodle was relocated interstate. He was offered to go up there and work on that job, but he would have to isolate in a hotel for 14 days. Then he was asked to work 9 days straight on the job. And he just was feeling really frustrated and disappointed that workers aren't being looked after, that was the expectation of 3 weeks plus having to be either in lockdown or working. And the workers are the lifeblood of the industry. Why aren't they being better taken care of? And he was saying things like, I'll be in prison for 2 weeks in that isolation. It's big stuff. And then I'll be working for 9 days. Will I catch COVID? Working in close confines with other people. This is a life and death decision I might be making here. And he ended up deciding not to take the job, even though it was with his touring family and he wanted that connection, needed that connection, decided against it, and found he was really relieved when he made that decision. And I just wanted to mention that because he went through a lot of the emotions. He was pulled and pushed in his own mind about what he should do, guilt, I'm being offered all this money, but I don't want to take it, and that's not fair because other people are doing it tough. And that's a positive story. He was offered a job and he's doing it really tough. So, there's people doing it a lot tougher, but everyone's doing it tough.
Yeah, and it depends on which position that you got yourself into. As you say, roller coaster, that's a really good term for it. Melbourne might have its 4 seasons in one day, but I think that we you know, would also have a roller coaster of 4 emotions at least, if not more, a day. So thank you, Margot. Kirsty, we'll put this over to you. What's been happening in your sector?
Hey, thanks, Byron. So yeah, I'm the Associate Director of the Arts Wellbeing Collective. So for those of you who aren't familiar, the Arts Wellbeing Collective is an initiative of Arts Centre Melbourne, and we're a collective of arts and cultural organisations who are committed to promoting positive mental health in the performing arts. And the reason I think that that's really important is I think that collective nature of the Arts Wellbeing Collective having been in place for 3.5 years now. You know, we didn't predict when we started this initiative that it would be so needed in the middle of a pandemic, but we're really grateful that we have kind of got that 3 years behind us, 3.5 years, and we have got that collection of a network and already in place, and we're really so grateful and thankful that we had that in place at this time. The performing arts, like everyone who's already spoken, has been obviously significantly impacted with closures, cancellations, and that means millions of dollars of lost revenue and lost work, months, if not years, before the industry is going to be fully recovered. I mean, a lot of our network, you know, finding it hard to see what recovered looks like. And what does kind of my work look like in the future. But for us, it's really shone a light on the challenges that were already faced by performing arts workers. They've just really been exacerbated and magnified through COVID. So precarious work and employment, sort of gig-to-gig work, a really fragile sector in terms of job and financial security. So those things were already there. The difference now is that it's a sector-wide problem because everybody across the performing arts, practitioners, companies, organisations, we're all experiencing it all at once. So whilst it was there before, we're now all in kind of the same position, not experiencing it the same way, but definitely in the same position. So it's a united impact. And so the things that we knew before and could ignore, we can't ignore them anymore as a sector. It's really raised the awareness of the importance of mental health and wellbeing. We initially saw some increase in the needs for kind of crisis support, but that's shifted somewhat. But I really would say that collaboration and a genuine desire to work together to truly address some of the kind of old work practices so that performing arts can really emerge from this disruption more resilient than ever has been really evident in our sector, and particularly in the work that the Arts Wellbeing Collective does. And like I said, having that kind of connection in place already has meant that we're in a really good place for people to really come together and use this time to go, how can we collectively work together? How can we actually make sure that we don't go back to those old ways of working that were taking such a toll? That a lot of the things that the other guys have spoken about are also, you know, things that are coming through for us, definitely around uncertainty. You know, what does my work look like? And really resonated with what Eugene was saying about people working at 2 different speeds, and even individuals sometimes feeling themselves working at 2 different speeds. So some people are just flat out and, you know, can't kind of keep up, and some people are really floundering and not being able to kind of get started and get going. So we've definitely seen a lot of that. Having to make really difficult decisions. So being in positions of decision making that people might not have really experienced before. And I think the other thing that's really emerging for us is learning on low resilience. So kind of in a time like this when we are coping with a lot of different things, but then a lot of us are also having to learn new things, and that's quite difficult, new ways of working or new ways of collaborating or taking our work online, and kind of learn new skills is a little bit of a challenge in a time when you've got a little bit less resilience than you might have when you weren't in the middle of a pandemic.
Yeah, very good points that you make, Kirsty. I, in the event circle, did see that there needed to be bit more support for the mental health and well-being of in these event circles, and that the pandemic really just shone a spotlight on what the needs are for any sector within the events industry. But I do hope that this is an awakening call for a lot of people in the industry to really focus on, you know, psychological risk, especially coming out of a pandemic as well, and all of the different challenges that are being presented to us, not just in the last 6 months, but what is the future going to look like. So I know that we're a very adaptive industry, and that that's what we pride ourselves on. We're problem solvers, but you know, we're coming across such new feelings and experiences now. So we do need to move this along. So we're going to get into the second question. We've yet to receive any questions through the Q&A. So just if you've got anything on your mind, please submit it through that Q&A function. So we'll keep going. So the second question was, what immediate crisis support is available and what are the steps to receiving them? So Margot, can you give us a list of the different things that people can get support for?
Yes, I can. These are general support services. I'd also mention that Byron will be sending out a list of the website, web addresses and the phone numbers tomorrow, and Christy will also be putting that information in the chat room today, so you don't need to quickly be scribbling things down now. So I'd just also like to mention that not everyone feels comfortable ringing up a support service. So these services I'm about to mention have lots of options. So there's telephone support if you do feel comfortable with that, but there's text-based, web chat, online forums and resources to read from the website. So keep that in mind and you can choose something that is aligned with your needs and your comfort levels. Firstly, 000, that's obvious, but fire, ambulance, police, if there's an emergency, that's who you ring. Lifeline, if you're in crisis, they provide short-term crisis support. Please try and get support before you're in crisis. It's never too early, but if you are in crisis, Lifeline will provide mental health support for you. Beyond Blue has really great resources available for depression, anxiety. They've got a corona mental health wellbeing info support service as well. So you can have a look at them. Kids Helpline, they provide support for people up to the age of 25. So it's a bit more than kids really, young adults as well. But so people here today might fall into that age bracket, or you might have children and you could suggest that they contact Kids Helpline if they need a bit of support and you're not the right person to be providing that for them for whatever reason. Suicide callback service is Eugene's spoken about suicide risk at the moment and always and into the future as well. You can call them for immediate support and then they'll put in place a plan with you to keep calling you back, help you keep safe, and they will just stay the course with people until they feel confident enough to be okay. Are you okay? It's Are You Okay Day tomorrow, and they've got some resources and they've found in the past there was a big message, are you okay? But then if people said no, no one knew what to do then and what to say or whether to panic or just didn't know. So they've realised that now, and so there's some really very basic helpful tips on if you're finding someone in your life that's not okay, how you can just help them tease out that and ask them the appropriate questions and get them the help that they need. So all of these services I've mentioned so far are available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They're national. But I did also want to mention one that isn't. It's national, but it's only available from 3 p.m. till midnight. that's Q Life. So that's an LGBTIQ mental health service. They do web chat and telephone counselling. So they're a great organisation to give you some support if that's where you'd like to get some support from. And these, lastly, are just things that people may not have thought about, but see your doctor, talk to your friends and family, talk to your peers, especially peers in the events world. People kind of get what you're going through. So use the support that's around you. And I'd just lastly like to talk about, this is a Victoria specific one from the Department of Health and Human Services, but people from interstate can look it up as well, of course. And they have really good resources on dealing with loss of control, which is what a lot of people we've identified today are feeling. And they have stuff from Beyond Blue and Lifeline on their website as well. So that's worth checking out if that's something that might be helpful for you.
Thanks, Margot. Again, that list is already in the chat function if you'd like to write any of those things down. And as Margot said, we will be sending out those numbers and details in tomorrow's email. And I'd like to put it on to you to talk about support acts. You've got some helplines as well and an intake process. Could you expand on that a bit as well?
Yeah, sure, Byron. So I'll be talking about the Support Act Wellbeing Helpline. So this Wellbeing Helpline was set up by Support Act a number of years ago, and that was in direct response to some studies that were done that found that people working in music are about 5 times more likely to struggle with depression and about 10 times more likely to show symptoms of anxiety. And that actually is across the wider entertainment industry as well. So that those similarly high levels across the whole entertainment industry. And we've collaborated with the Arts Wellbeing Collective as well to open that up to performing arts, people in the performing arts. And since the coronavirus, Support Act has received some funding from the federal government. And that means we've been able to open up this wellbeing helpline to the wider arts industry. I know Christy's going to pop the numbers up in the chat for you all. To access the Wellbeing Helpline, you can make a call or you can jump onto the Support Act website and there's a contact form there. This service is 24/7, it's confidential, and it's quite a simple process to access. So you need to call or make contact via the contact form. You'll be asked some questions, general details like your name, what industry you work in, and some questions about your situation. You'll be asked whether you want to speak to a male or female identifying counsellor, and if you need to speak to someone sort of more immediately, or if you're happy to wait for an appointment. So it can be quite simple. I'd really encourage people to do that. We've also opened up recently, we've got the a First Nations dedicated helpline. So that's obviously for people who identify as being Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander. And that gives you access to counsellors who are either First Nations themselves or who have cultural awareness training. We also have the Managers Hotline. That's another service for people who work within these industries and are team leaders or managers and who need some help and direction when supporting their team. And that can be about anything. That can be about how to manage a particular situation with a particular team member, or how to support your team with mental health concerns. So those are all available to you through Support Act's website as well. You can jump on and have a look there. If you have it, I would, sometimes it can be a little bit buried in all the processes, but if you work for an organisation, they may have an employee assistance program, which is another counselling provider. I think sometimes organisations don't advertise that they have those, and they can be sort of available, but nobody's accessing them. So I'd really encourage you to talk to HR if that's something that you have available. I'm aware that a lot of people we're talking to today are contractors or are casuals or are freelance and don't have these systems in place. And finally, as Margot mentioned, talk to your GP. There's mental health care plans are available to everyone, and that is to access rebated psychological services through mental health professionals who have a Medicare provider number, such as a psychologist or a mental health social worker. It is a rebated cost. It can be really hard to find bulk billing services, psychological services. I think this is a real problem that I want to acknowledge. Even if you are able to get a mental health care plan, you still have to pay the cost up front and then get rebated, and there can still be a fair gap fee. So you might have to do a little bit of looking around to find someone who is affordable. That's also quite a simple process. It can be a bit longer, but when you speak to your GP, I would suggest booking a double appointment because it's a little bit to go through. They'll go through obviously some questions with you, and they'll go through a questionnaire about how you've been feeling in the past fortnight. That can be a little bit confronting. So just to be aware of that. They will ask you about, hopelessness and feelings of suicidal ideation. So just to flag that with you, that if that's going to be quite triggering for you, just make sure that you're a bit prepared for those questions. And then you can set some basic goals with them. That care plan then goes to the psychologist for you to access. At the moment, there's it's usually 6 sessions, and then you can get an extension for an extra 4. At the moment, due to coronavirus, I know that these, especially in Victoria, I'm not sure if it's nationwide, to be honest, but you can get an extra 10. That's with reviews with your GP. So I just, flag that with you now. That's sort of a service that's available now. We're not sure when that's expiring, so get onto it if you can. And lastly, I'd just like to talk about financial counselling. I'm referring people all the time to financial counsellors. I think it's really part of my work as a social worker to look really holistically at people's lives, and obviously financial concerns are really high up there at the moment. If that's a concern for you at the moment, you can actually access that through the Support Act Wellbeing helpline. You just need to flag with the intake worker that you'd like to speak to a financial counsellor. And there's also some resources on the Support Act website about services to access. One of them I'm going to flag is the National Debt Helpline, I think it's called, and I will get that number to you, Byron, so you can share that with everyone. They will give you free financial counselling, so that's a really good resource for people.
Fantastic. Someone did comment that getting availability to therapists can be quite difficult as well, given
Very
that
much so.
Everyone's experiencing the same thing. So
yeah, I'd also like to say that you might find someone that's available, and then you have an appointment with them, and they don't really fit. It doesn't really click. So it can be really challenging to find the right person for you. I always say to people, it's a bit of a cheesy thing to say, but like finding a good therapist is like finding a good pair of jeans. Not every pair is going to fit everyone. So it can take a little bit of time, and that can be really disheartening. That can be really frustrating because you've got to repeat your story a lot of the time. But I really encourage you to keep seeking that out, because you will find someone. The cost and the energy involved to do that is trying, but if you're experiencing these things, it's really helpful to talk to someone, and I'd encourage you to persist if you can.
We must keep going. Thank you. We must keep going. We'll get into question 3 now. Just a reminder to keep the questions coming through the Q&A box. We do have one, which is a question about social media. So we'll get to that in the Q&A. But I think that for the question 3, we're looking at the top tips that we could provide people in the industry right now, and what can we be doing as a sector and to support each other. So what I might do, since we want to get Q&A running at around 11:20, is we'll start with you, Kirsty. If we could get your 3 top tips, and then we'll go around the table.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Byron. I think really the first thing to do is to really listen, to really understand the things that are happening across the sector that existed before COVID and that will still exist after COVID, unless steps are taken to think and work differently. So really listen, really get in touch. What are the things people in the sector are raising that are impacting their ability to do their best work? Once you know that, then you can start to look at ways of addressing the root cause and try and remove those risks for good. At the Arts Wellbeing Collective, we've always worked in an integrated way at the individual, organisation and the sector level in order to really kind of drive that positive change. If we only work at the individual level, for example, if we just kind of provide, let's say, resilience training to individuals, but we ignore the need for the organisational change to happen, then the individual is still going to be working in a workplace that's not providing them with the support that they need. So they can be as resilient as the training has enabled them to be, but if they're going into a workplace where they're still, you know, where they're being poorly led, where there's bullying, where there's unreasonable workloads, then that's not going to help them at all. No amount of resilience training is going to help them to do their best work in that environment. So I think if I had to kind of really summarise that, then it is really about listening and understanding what are those things across the sector that are causing risk for people. Think about how you might go about changing those and do that at an integrated way, individual, organisational and sector level. That's my three.
Excellent. Yeah, and very valid points there. I do like the fact that we need to look at this from an individual, an organisational and a sector perspective in order for us to really make a dent into mental health and wellbeing. So thank you. Eugene, give us your top 3 tips from your perspective.
I would say that the most important thing for me is being community. So don't try to do it alone. Reach out to people when you need help. Reach out to other people when you don't need help, and just check that they're okay, because a lot of people look like they're okay and they're not. You know, speak to your mental health professionals and get counselling or get that kind of support. The other thing that I would say is find your anchor, because this isn't going to be the last storm that we have to deal with. And so if you can find the source of your value and your worth that is not based in your job, that is something that's intrinsic to you, that's going to put you in really good stead for the future and for all the other storms that come in the future. And the third thing that I would say is, yes, now we're in lockdown, but, and, you know, the whole industry feels like it's frozen. But now is a really good time to rethink things and regroup and to plan the next steps. You really want to get to a point where you can hit the ground running, and not out of exhaustion and not out of a reaction, but responding to what the situation is and having thought it through clearly and strategically. So that'd be my 3.
Yeah, very valid point, Huge. Yeah, we're all sort of searching for answers, aren't we, about which direction that we head in. So I guess those who are taking their best foot forward is going to help them in the long run. Margot, your top 3 tips, please.
Okay. I'd firstly like to speak about event organisers. Some things I've noticed that have really worked in the spaces I'm around is doing a welfare check on your team, just a simple phone call to people, asking how they're doing, letting them know that you care and that you're interested. Social Zoom catch-ups or Friday night Zoom drinks with the team is a really lovely way of having people feel connected and cared about. But the main thing, and I know I won't be able to count because I'm going to do 4, I'm only on to the 3rd one now, but the main thing I'd like to say is to keep the team updated on what's happening around your event space, what might be happening next, even if it's just to say, no news at the moment, I'll let you know when I hear anything or when we've got an update, just so people feel they're not forgotten, that they're part of the team still, they're connected, they're remembered, they're important. And then my last one, this is for event workers. Maybe consider creating a WhatsApp group or a private Facebook group and just connect with your team, your peers. And it can be as simple as thinking of you all, can't wait to see you all at the next event, whenever that might be. And it's nothing much, but it's kind of everything, just for people to feel that they're part of something still and they matter and they belong to the group. And it's also an opportunity for people to say if they're not doing so well, it's a space for people to express that and get some support from their peers as well.
Thank you, Margot. There's been some fantastic questions that were submitted in the registration, and there was one suggestion that I'd like to put forward to Kirsty is, how do you manage a client who expresses their emotions around COVID, keeping them on track and keeping the conversation professional while maintaining that level of care?
Yeah, thanks, Byron. It's a really good one. I think, you know, even in times when we were actually face to face, there's things that you can draw on. It takes another level of concentration when we might be doing these conversations over video conferencing. So I think kind of keeping that in mind is really important. I feel like a bit of a broken record, but the first thing you can do is really listen. We sort of always talk about how important listening is, and we forget that it's really hard to do. And when someone is wanting to speak to you, the best thing you can do is take that role of just really listening. Don't feel like you've got to solve or fix a problem. Sometimes people just want to talk, and you might also not be the right person to solve or fix their problem. And so kind of putting yourself in that position might not be the most helpful thing to do. The first thing you can do is really, really listen to what they want to say and give them that space where a whole lot of people around them might not have been giving them that beautiful gift that you can give them around just really listening to them. And just, you may not have the skills to solve their problem or to fix it, but it doesn't mean that you can't help. You can always help. Listen non-judgmentally, give them support and information. So even like we've done today, providing the different avenues of support that they can reach out to. Encourage the person to get help if you are not the right person to help them. Encourage them to have other supports. It doesn't always have to be professional support. It can also be things like self-care. So, you know, understanding yourself, how to look after yourself and practicing really good self-care kind of gives you that ability to help others to think about their own self-care as well. And think about the context or the setting. And I think this came up before when Margot was talking. Where are you? Where's the conversation happening? Is it the right place? Is there some other place that you can kind of go to make that conversation the most comfortable it can be? And like I said before, especially if it's over video conferencing, you know, think about putting the person in a position where they're able to be their most comfortable and share the things that they want to share. And like I said, really listen.
There's a lot of questions around how, you know, how team leaders or managers or even business owners can help their workers that are under them to support their well-being. But there's been a lot of other questions very similar to that. So thank you, Kirsty. With a little bit more time, we'll get into the Q&A, and I would like to start with the first person who has asked this question. And they say, I find that social media can at times make me feel somewhat connected to my festival peers, but can also really bring you down when people post divisive or sensationalized opinions and articles. Any tips on how to manage personal social media use to keep things balanced, or more positive things you can do to feel connected to your peers that aren't so online focused? Who would like to take that? Margot?
Yes, Byron, I've got a few things to say, but other people might like to join in. I already was planning to say a little bit about this when we went down to 3 tips each. I was actually going to talk about if you're finding everyone's suddenly an expert epidemiologist and an expert in public health, and you know, everyone's got an opinion and so on, and a thought and a belief, and consider muting for a month just to give yourself a break. However, as the question suggests, the support that you can garner from social media and your social media groups, and especially peer support from your event people, that would also go if you start muting. So I'm wondering, because I've previously just spoken about how Facebook groups and WhatsApp groups have been really helpful for teams I've been involved in. Is it appropriate just to set up some guidelines and some rules? Just saying things are tough at the moment, we don't have to do these rules forever, but how about we as a group just come up with some ways of what sort of things we can communicate in this group, and what things are best left for your other Facebook friends that it doesn't belong in this space at the moment.
Thank you, Margot. Let's look at some of the questions that were submitted, unless someone is willing to put a question through at the moment. But by all means, please send them through. Some of the ones that came through are very interesting. Again, we've touched upon a few of them. So I'd like to look at this one, and I think maybe Margot or Eugene could answer this. They said that through their 20+ years in the arts, they saw a pressing need for mental health support in the arts industry. So working festivals and venues, they've always felt that there was a need to have counsellors on site for staff performer resilience, patron negotiations and crisis response situations, and have noticed similar needs across the industry. In their case, theatre, comedy and music, in both professional and training environments. So they're wondering what the panel might think about the ongoing role of mental health professionals in the industry itself. Eugene, would you like to have a go?
Yeah, I see there's no specific legal requirement, but I think that there are ethical requirements upon us. And when we're working with people and putting them under strain, there are duty of care issues that we need to deal with. It's already been researched and documented that people who lose sleep because of their work are actually at a higher health risk and a higher suicide rate potentially. All these sorts of things factor in. So I think that it is important to provide support, and very often producers and heads of organizations are looking at things as if it's a zero-sum game. So if I spend money on this, then that means that we're going to lose out in other areas, rather than saying, actually, no, treating our people well is going to get more out of them. We're going to have lower turnover, and the whole vibe within our organization is going to be so much better that everyone's going to be happier. It actually ends up being a really good investment. I think that it's worth sitting down and thinking that through. I think a lot of producers and people who are in management of creative industries are so focused on having creative events that they plan, but they don't think so much about how to be creative about the models and the processes that they use. And so they can be quite antiquated, and they don't evolve in the same way that our events do.
Can I jump in, Byron?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Eugene, that's exactly right. And I think, over time, as we become much more aware of the way we work, we can start to, plan some of those risky ways of working out of the way we work, and we'll actually approach it in a much more healthy way, thinking about that delivering us a much better outcome. And I always see these really strong parallels between the journey we're going on around mental health and wellbeing and the journey that we've been on around physical health, because we probably had these same conversations around occupational health and safety kind of 20 years ago. It's going to be too expensive for us to have 2 people lifting, or it's going to be really expensive for us to bring in all of this specialist equipment. And but we've been through that journey, and I feel like we're on a really similar journey around mental health and wellbeing. So, the more that we're able to actually make this part of our way of working, make this part of how we do things, the more it's actually going to become integrated, even to a point in time where we may not need those specialists one-on-one on site, because we have a much more healthy way of working from a mental health and wellbeing perspective. So I like that parallel between, you know, the advances and progress we made in physical health. We're going on that same journey from a mental health and wellbeing perspective.
It's a very good point. As you say, risk management is quite a big part for a lot of, you know, large events. You know, why aren't we looking at the psychological risk that can also, improve the way that, you know, can keep, you know, the retention of staff, and absenteeism as well can be reduced as a fact. So actually, we've got more like a statement rather than a question, but it's coming live. And I think that'll be the last one for today. Do you feel the pressure on mental health is due to a society becoming more focused on material items and money at the expense of public health? It's an agree or disagree.
I think that, can I say yes to both? I think that, yes, we do put a focus on finances a lot, but we're also seeing a degradation of our understanding of our own identity, and we're seeing a massive degradation of community. And I think that a prime measure, a prime factor in people's mental health is actually how well they are based in community. And that outweighs money for me. You can be really poor and still be really, really happy and well balanced, because ultimately we need human connections. But in order to have healthy human connections, you actually need a good sense of identity as well in yourself. Margot, do you have something to add to that?
I wonder if we're seeing an opportunity now. This pandemic has really shown us what's important, and what's money, of course, is still important, but connection has been a real theme I've noticed of today and of generally during the pandemic, and how important that is. And hopefully that's a lesson we can take from this and move forward with into the future.
I would love to just keep on chatting, but I know that we're coming up on the hour. For those who have listened in for the full hour, thank you so much. Your attendance is greatly appreciated. Thank you to everyone on the round table. There's just so much else that we could unpack. So if anyone has any further questions you'd like to have answered, of course, again, we're doing that podcast. So please submit your questions to hello@journeyundiscovered.com.au. But again, everything will be in that email post this event. So we hope that this has been a tremendous benefit to you all. And thank you so much for the comments coming in. It's really fantastic that everyone is really focused on mental health and well-being at this stage. I know that we talk about adapting, and that's sort of the buzzword that's been happening since the pandemic, but it really rings true for all of us. So please stay healthy and take care of yourselves with support in this together. Bye for now.